Well, hey
Perfect.
everyone. Hey everyone, thank you again today for tuning in to another episode of Your Day with David. Again, today is also your day with Joey, Joey Tompoulos, man, across the hall from me in our sophomore year. Actually, it might have been later of year of college. And uh, there's a lot that I want to talk with Joey about. Again, as always, thank you for tuning in. If you have not yet subscribed to the channel, please do so we can continue to support our community and people that might be in similar situations like yourself. But Joey's a good friend of mine in the fact that he was one of the people when we first met that engages or initiates connection. And what I mean by that in a less profound way is he would invite us to parties at his place. Um, because he moved in. We had already been living in our spot when he and his roommates came to be. And I do remember that probably the first three, maybe more times that he invited us, though, we weren't able to actually swing by and come over. And at some point, correct me if I'm wrong, Joey, you guys might have gotten the impression that we just didn't want to come. Uh, and that wasn't the case. In fact, there was probably nothing more than we want to do than actually go out and party and have a good time. But all of us were just busy in our own regard. And I think there was one night that all my other roommates were busy, but I knew that you guys were throwing something. So the only person I knew as well was you. And for those watching, you might notice that Joey does not have his camera on. To be safe, he's driving. We want to make sure he's focused on the road and not so much how he looks on camera. And
Absolutely.
so this is what we're working with, and we might take a quick break in the middle of this when he gets done driving. We'll see how that goes. But um, I remember walking into your guys' apartment and meeting everyone except you and pretty much saying, "Hey, is Joey here?" was all I could do because I only knew you. I only knew your name. And then there's all these people that I'd never met before. And there's just this guy walking into some random person's apartment. And although that's kind of the nice thing about parties is technically everyone there is random. So it's kind of allowed. And I think you were out on the deck or something. Then I said hi, and I don't think I stayed long, but just that first night at least, just got to know you guys a little bit better. And then, um, Joe, if you want to jump in real quick, who all were you
Yes.
living with at that time again?
So we it was an apartment, and we always had a bunch of people over there on the weekends because we were the designated party apartment. We were off campus. Um, the police didn't stop by often. I think in the 2 years I lived
Often.
there, we had the police come by I think twice, and we were very loud. We shot fireworks and did a whole bunch of stuff. So I can't believe they didn't come out more. But yeah, we was living with my really good friend. He's my best friend Logan, and one of my
Hmm.
other really good friends, Grant. And
Yep.
we had just a bunch of people over. I can't tell you how many times a person I'm like really good friends with, like including yourself, they're like, "Yeah, the first time I met you was at one of your parties." And I'm like, "Oh no!" Like those were all a blur. I don't. I can't tell how many times I've met friends and they're like, "Yeah, you like met us there. You were really nice." I'm like, oh, "I'm so happy I was nice during the whole thing because like I don't remember a lot of them, but it was a good time. It was college.
Yeah. Now you act like drunk you could have possibly been not nice, which I don't think is really.
Sometimes you just never know like what's gonna happen, but I have been told by a lot of like my friends and family that the non-sober version of myself is just me just being happy-go-lucky and just kind of goofy. And I'm like, well, it's just me being me, so I'm happy about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's nice because obviously there's the people when they get a little bit of the Kool-Aid in their system, they become a different
Yes.
person. And then in your case, you just became a more exaggerated version of you anyway.
Yes.
um, which is nice, right? It's comforting. And you mentioned that both your friends and family have seen you drunk. In fact, I've met uh, Mr. T back when he was Mr. T, and now yourself. Now that you are
Yes.
in education, and he came over, fixed up some drinks for everyone. And the reason why I bring him up again real quick was I remember he specifically made this one drink, and you might already know it the moment I mentioned this, but it was a Pepsi drink, and I think he would put in a little bit of, like, was it whiskey or rum or something? It had a special name.
Yep.
Do you know
I
what was
do.
it?
It's a Panamanian drink we got from our cousins over there. It's called a pintao, and
Pinto.
essentially it's rum, a little bit of like Pepsi, and then some lime.
Yeah. Obviously not a very complicated drink. Uh, but uh, so I mean that's kind of the beauty of it, though, is to impress a bunch of college people who don't really care. There's Whoa, this guy's putting alcohol in a cup. Sign me up. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on top of it too, it kind of beats crappy beer, you know. So
Yeah.
having like an actual like mixed beverage is really nice.
Yeah, and we say that, but that group of people definitely had its fair share of crappy beer too.
Oh yeah, no,
Um,
we were not above that at all.
Now, you guys, correct me if I'm wrong. Did you guys share the deck with Blake and Nick and TJ, or were they
Yes.
across? Okay, so
So we shared it with them, and then we became really good friends with them. And there
mhm,
was supposed to be a wooden fence between our buildings. You know, like so our decks were supposed to be split in two. We had our
yeah,
deck, and they had theirs. But we became such good friends. We took that wooden fence down. We weren't supposed to do it, but made parties better because you can go back and forth between both apartments so easily.
yeah. Wait, when you moved out, did you have to like nail it back together, or what happened?
Oh yeah, we had to reconstruct it. We saved all the nails and we actually kept them in a really secure spot.
Like a
And I think it was
drawer?
like in like it was some drawer. I think it was at their
Mm,
apartment. We had to put the nails and screws and stuff back in. So it was funny because we weren't supposed to do that, but you know, it's just sometimes
yeah.
how you gotta roll.
Yeah, because that's my question, was that I was going to ask if you had known. So the three people that were in that apartment was Nick, Blake, and TJ, and so you had not met them before moving into that place, right?
No, we met him. I met him. I was the first person moving to my apartment, and they were in theirs for about a couple weeks. And I
Mm.
remember being in my apartment, chilling, get all my furniture and stuff in there, and I hear like noises next door. So I go on the deck, and all three of them are just hanging out, drinking. I peep my head around the fence. I go, "Hey!" And they're like, "Oh no!" They're like, "Oh, we're being too loud. We're gonna get
One
like
of
yelled
these.
at. Oh no!" And I'm like, "Are you guys my new neighbors?" And they're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "What you drinking?" And they're like, "Oh,
Mm,
we were just having some beer." I'm like, "Can I come over?" And they're like, "Sure." So we hung
yeah,
out there, and from then on, it was history.
yeah. And I think it's nice too, because I think that group, both your side and that uh, hit it off well. I think sometimes when you get randos together, there's some after you meet, there's some tension, but I felt like in that group things just kind of meshed pretty well,
Yeah,
and both friend groups and people that we all knew enjoyed each other. No one was really that much of a um, I don't know how I want to describe it, but people got along,
yeah. No one
and
was really a
yeah.
big like bump on a log. You know, like everyone was actually pretty solid.
Yeah. And I had mentioned this on the episode that just dropped this yesterday, but
Ooh.
even though that I had came over that one time to one of your parties, we still didn't get to interact as a whole lot. But we came over, and this might have been actually before that first party I went to, but we had met a couple of times. And one of my best friends, Sadie and Drew, had an altercation with another um, person that I had been involved with earlier in the hallway or something like that on Halloween. Do you remember this
Oh
much?
yeah. You know, I know that there was some type of a problem. I'm thinking back. I'm not exactly sure the full extent of it, but I
Yeah.
remember there being some like hubbub in the hallway. and I remember just being like, I wonder what's going on over there.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing about that for me was I was out and about, and essentially, the long story short, an ex of mine, who you know whatever, full disclosure, like, I thought that everything was water on the bridge. She was bringing her new guy over to hang out with my roommates because they were still chill. I didn't care about it. I was out at the bar, but
Yeah.
basically, it was not water under the bridge. She got very much intoxicated. And then there was an altercation. Her man like punched my friend Sadie in the face, something like that. Yeah. And then you stepped in probably post beating, just to kind of like facilitate the of orderly dispersal of people. At least that's how it was described to me at the time.
I feel
So
like my memory on it's a little vague. I definitely was probably under the influence,
yeah,
and
no, it was,
I
yeah,
like
you guys
vaguely
were
remember
also,
it. I would say probably like what I would do in that situation, be like, hey man, like get the hell out of here. Like you can't be here right now. Like this is not a good place. You need to
yeah.
leave. And I feel like that's probably what I would have said, but
Hmm.
I don't know.
Now, yeah, because it was Halloween, because obviously you guys are doing something at your place, I would assume that year. Um, but yeah, and I think after that moment when I found out about it, then I kind of, even though I had known you, then I had a small, like, that was the beginning for like a little bit of maybe even respect for my buddy Joey. Not that, there's any reason why I didn't respect him, but then you're like, okay,
Yeah.
like, this guy's a good, not only like fun to be around, but he's also a good person. Um, and Now, give me a little bit of background, Joey, too, like, because my group of friends, we were all like nerds, engineers, and stuff like that. But like you, what did you go for in college? Why were you there? And kind of what do you do now?
Yeah. So I went to college to get my degree in education. So I have a secondary education endorsement, and basically I'm in history and U.S. history, world history, U.S. government, and all that stuff. And
Mm,
right now I'm actually teaching at a middle school. This is my just finished up my third year of being a seventh grade social studies teacher.
mm. Now,
Yeah.
do we like Christopher Columbus, Joey?
Christopher Columbus is quite the hot topic issue. In my
Hmm.
opinion, I think Christopher Columbus Day should be changed to either First Peoples Day or
Mm,
as like probably like yeah, probably First Peoples Day or like Native Americans Day. I think that
sure.
once you understand what happened with Christopher Columbus and the people he met here, um,
It's hard to
it's not
celebrate.
yeah, it's hard. I know that like in the community of history, we're supposed to look at people through a lens of their time period, and you're also supposed to take an effect of okay, how did it actually happen in relative to like my time that I'm living in now.
Hmm.
And don't get me wrong, Christopher Columbus is a really good like sailor and navigator. Like that is not in question at all. The thing that's in question is how horrible he was to, for lack of a better term, to an entire group of people that he just massacred and slaughtered.
Yeah. So
And
for
in my
those don't
opinion, yeah,
listening, I don't mean to cut you off. For those listening and watching, the Arawaks, if I'm not mistaken, Christopher Columbus essentially committed mass genocide. Uh,
massive amounts.
and we have a holiday after this guy. And I mean, I didn't even know what to think about it when I first heard about it, because obviously that part is not in our history books. Uh, and then when you find out as an adult, you're like, wait, we were celebrating this guy that. So yeah, little history lesson for you. And Joey teaches history, so hopefully there will be even more fun facts as this goes on. Um,
Absolutely. And just another thing too, the reason
mhm,
why Christopher Columbus Day became as big as it is, the Italian immigrants who came to the United States, they wanted to have their kind of like a cultural fusion and
mhm,
have like a little bit of their own history be in the United States history. So one of their people whom they respect, and they were like, hey, we should like name a holiday after this guy. Like he helped found the United States, and like it could help bring Italian immigrants to get more like traction in the United States because like Italian immigrants weren't being treated as well.
Mm,
So they're like, let's promote Christopher Columbus Day. And sure enough, it passed. And everyone knows the old expression, Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, and that whole rhyme. So
mhm.
it comes from a really unique place in United States history because technically Columbus did not discover the United States of America.
Good
He
old Leif
didn't.
Erikson. Yeah.
Yes, you could say Leif Erikson, and Leif Erikson Day would be pretty cool if we had the United States. I mean, heck, you could even bring up, there's even records of like some Chinese boats that have been in the Americas even beforehand too, because some of the words in Chinese are very similar to some of the words that some first peoples that came here have in similarity with them. So there, he didn't
Mm,
discover the United States. Everyone kind of
mhm.
misrepresents that. But yeah, it's I think the holiday should be changed in name, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. So my father is probably one of the guys I consider the most educated men on the. I mean, he's 79, so he's kind of been around for all of history anyway. But still, he like I not too long ago, still in his 70s, I explained to him that Christopher Columbus did not discover America, and I think he tried to after I told him that he didn't believe it, and so he tried to find information that said that he did, and all he found was the fact that I was right, and it blew his mind. In his 70s,
Yeah,
he's like, wait, like this actually is true. Like he did not discover America. Uh,
yeah,
the
it's
Vikings did.
yeah, and the
Potentially.
wild part about it is that you have so many people who, and for great, it's a great example of how propaganda is so easily spread. I mean, holy cow, entire generations of people believe, oh no, Christopher Columbus 100% he discovered. And you're like, well,
Yeah.
not only did he not, but you know,
Yeah.
other
I
people did.
think I think it's more also a great example of the winner gets to decide what history is,
Yep,
right? The
yep.
truth of history. Uh, because it's really easy to say how great you are and really tough to say like, oh, maybe we're not so great. Um,
Yeah.
now why education, Joey? Because again, I say that knowing full well that you have a very good personality to work with kids and people in general, very social, high energy, which I don't know if behind closed doors you're drained after a day of school, but why deal with people, right?
It, it's a great question, and I get asked it often. I teach 12 and 13-year-olds. And I
Mm,
think that if you ask yourself at age 12 and 13, were you the best version of yourself? Everybody and their grandma is going to say, oh, no, nowhere close to being the best version. But there is a very redeemable quality with kids that make my job a lot of fun. I chose education because I couldn't do a desk job where every day is the same, day in, day out, do the same exact thing. With teaching, every day is different. You
mm,
get this every day there are triumphs, every day there are tumultuous days, there are fun days, horrible days, you name it. And I chose education because the kids help keep me a kid at heart. And I think that once you lose your inner child, life becomes very dull.
mm. I
Yeah.
agree. I agree.
It's kind of like
And
the most like selfless, selfish answer you can get.
yeah. And I think a great thing about children, and you see it all the time online, is just like um very blunt, very innocent, very straightforward in the things they say and do. And
Oh yeah.
uh I think it's refreshing because when so again, people who know me, I'm part of a big family, one of 8 siblings. I grew up changing my own younger siblings' diapers because my parents were like, "Screw this! Like, we have a whole Asian workforce at our disposal. Might as well put them to work, right?" And and so I've always been big on family, but also like I loved spending time with kids at reunions, family reunions, or when I'm at any social gathering. And um, the you mentioned the inner child and losing that, just it's kind of tragic. But what I'm curious about is when you work with 12 and 13-year-old, or work when you teach 12 and 13-year-olds acting like you're a therapist. um, when you're teaching these guys, what because they're very impressionable at that age, maybe even younger,
Very.
right?
Yeah.
I talked a little bit about it on my episode with Quinn Fowler a couple weeks ago. When I was growing up, me being Asian, and this is just a segue to talk about how impressionable children are by their environment. Um,
Very.
Me being half Asian, we talked a little bit about our experiences with racism growing up because my friend was also Asian in our small town, and he didn't have as much of an experience as I did. But I remember there's this gentleman, again, we were playing baseball in minor league, so we were probably like 10, 11, 12 years old. um I think actually I would have been like 8 or 9 when I think about it and do the math. And I struck out on base, and I got called by this other guy who was a year older than me. I got called a dirty fucking Filipino, right?
Oh
And
my
this
God.
and this guy's 10, okay, at this time.
What?
He's 10. So obviously,
Jesus.
one, this kid isn't even smart enough to know where the Philippines are. Okay. So I want to put that in like world geography. I don't even know when we start taking that, but it's not, I don't know. But
That's way
obviously,
too, like, how does this kid even have those words come out of his mouth? Because he's not learning that himself. That's got to be
that's
a
right.
learned
And so
behavior.
it's from, his parents and growing up. So when I talk about and what you see, 12 and 13-year-old kids and how impressionable they are, what are some surprising things that you do get to see on a day-to-day basis? Has there been a situation that kind of stuck with you, or is there like patterns that you see? I'm very curious.
Yeah. So, oof. First off, gotta say, really sorry you went through that. That is
It's all
horrible.
right.
And oh my goodness. Um, I
I
would
turned out all
say,
right.
I think you did. I think you're doing pretty good for yourself. Um, the thing that kind of strikes me by this generation of kids is one, they're Generation Z. So as the listeners know, like you and I are millennial, and
Mm-hmm.
the next generation coming up is Generation Z. Millennials, we are very tolerant of people's dispositions, their sexual orientation, their just choices. I feel like millennials are pretty tolerant of a lot of groups. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like our age group does a pretty good job of accepting people for who they are. This next generation is even more tolerant.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of funny because not funny, haha, but
More
when you picture
interesting, yeah.
yeah, you picture people when they bully people, it's like, oh, it's because they look different than me. And you picture like that 1980s style bullying where it's like nerd, with four eyes.
Shove them in a locker and
Yeah, right. Like with this generation, they'll bully each other because the kid's being mean to other kids. And you're like, so hang on, let me get this straight. You're picking on him because he is picking on other kids, and they're like, yeah, my group of friends doesn't like him because he's being mean. And it's
mm,
like, wow, like, granted, bullying is not good in any aspect whatsoever. I want to make it abundantly clear. I don't tolerate that in my classroom. I don't care if the
mm,
kid's being mean at all, but just the style of how they talk about things and how they
yeah.
interact with each other is it's pretty eye-opening because they're the most tolerant generation of us all. And I'm gonna make this hot take. When their generation is in control of things, because as you know, like generations live and they die and they move on and they pass on their things.
Wait, people
This
die,
group,
Joey?
I know, oh, hate to break it to you, but
Shit.
we do pass away.
Wow, we're
And
fucked.
sometimes, but when this generation is in control of things, the world better watch out, man, because they
Mm.
are super tolerant and very just opening and accepting. So I'm looking forward to it. They're gonna change the world, man.
So you're saying that when they say the world should look out, you're saying that in a good way.
Absolutely. The people who
Mm.
are in control who don't do the right thing, or people who get away with greed or corruption or whatever, they better be on notice because this next group, man, they ain't gonna tolerate that.
You
Not at
know,
all.
we just got to make sure that they actually get to grow up, huh?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
you hit on the head.
Well, yeah, we'll touch on that a little bit later. Now, I want to ask though, because I think that being tolerant, of course, is such a great thing, and actually, the science of being tolerant will, if you get better at it in life, will actually lead to quite a bit of success for yourself as far as navigating social circles and negotiations, both at work and outside, even in networking events. And um, really, tolerance comes from how do I want to say this? A position of listening. I think most of the times, when you're in a
Yes.
conversation, are you talking or are you listening, or what are your intentions? And for people as well who are listening or watching this, you kind of should ask yourself too: are you having conversation with a person so that you can say what's on your mind, and then cut in whenever you want to say that, or are you actually listening to them and then you can make a response to what they said? Because it's very
Yeah,
important. There's a very distinct that's a very important distinction, because if you are listening and then responding, uh, then that is a new thought versus letting them talk and then you are going to say what you're already going to say. um, you have to, to me, that's what change is. That's what, again, we want to talk about tolerance. You have to let the one side get their point across, because otherwise I feel if you're just waiting for your turn to spout what you want to, then it's not really a conversation at all. It's just you talking.
I
The
would
reason why
I would highly agree. I would agree with that.
Now the reason why I say that, and I am going to ask this question not knowing one where I stand on it or what my opinion is on it, but do you think that there is a point where we are too tolerant of things?
I
Like,
think
do
that
do we have to draw a line?
it's a good question because if you look at the world in a black and white sense,
I don't
it's you're
like to
either
do that
tolerant or you're
for
not.
sure.
Oh no, I'm a very much there is no black and white, there's gray. And
Hmm.
there is the whole world is just different shades of it. Now, I'm not gonna say it's 50 shades of gray because that's a whole other story. But
No.
I am gonna say that being too tolerant to like the nth degree, like the most tolerant person is also the kind of person who might not stand up for their own voice, and they
Hmm.
might lose their voice in a crowd of people because they're too afraid of either hurting people or they're too afraid of like rocking the boat. But
Hmm.
there comes a point where on the opposite side, if you're not tolerant, then you don't care about other people's feelings and emotions, and you're like, you know what, I'm just gonna be me, and if you don't like
Hmm.
that, who cares. So
Hmm.
all in life is a balance between, I think that if you have a lot of tolerance, but you also can speak up and have your own voice, then you're doing pretty good. Because there should
Hmm.
be things in life that you go, you know what, I'm not a fan of that. And I'm not a big, supporter of that. Like, I don't like duck pate. And there's a lot of people out there that love duck pate. And they're like, it's amazing. You put on sandwiches. I'm like, I don't like it. It just doesn't taste good to me. You know,
Mm.
granted, that's kind of like a childish example, but I
Everyone's
do
a picky
believe
eater.
that, yeah, right. It's like sometimes, people are picky eaters, but there are other topics where I think that everyone should be tolerant of. And that's one of those things that I'll stick to my guns and say, hey, if a person comes up to you and says, I'm actually transgendered, I'd prefer it if you call me um like Mike. I'd prefer that over like Michaela.
Mm.
Sure. Hey, that's your body, that's your choice. I'll support you and let them know, like, hey, sometimes I'm gonna make a mistake. I have students in my classroom who are transsexual, and they'll say, "Hey, Mr. T, do you mind calling me so and so? That's just how I identify." I'm like, "Absolutely," because
Mm.
my name is Joseph, but no one calls me Joseph. One calls me Joey. How could I
Mhm.
dare be the one to say, "Oh no, I'm not going to call you Mike instead of Michaela"?
Mhm.
So that's just my interpretation of it, and I think that that's something that everyone should be tolerant of because they're being themselves, and we should be ourselves. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, the you pretty much, um, r in much more words, kinda stole the quote out of my mouth, which is, um, the reason why I ask if you can be too tolerant, I feel like, when you talk about things like identity, you have to I'll just say the quote first so this makes sense. It's
Yeah.
if you don't stand for something, that means you
Mm,
stand for nothing. That's the quote. I
agreed.
don't know who or where or what, um, but I think it is important to say, like, okay, yeah, I am tolerant of things, but where do I stand? Like, what are things that if someone asks me, hey, what is your opinion on this? What side of the line do I find myself on? Because I think a lot of people could go about their day-to-day life without people asking them that question on any topic. And so they don't do much self-reflection about figuring out, well, okay, well, who am I, and what do I find important? And then what is my view on these important topics? Um, and I think that's a pretty good segue into our later end the conversation here. And real quick though, uh, you and I met at Iowa State, but and you're driving today. I want to apologize for anyone listening too if I have a raspy voice because I lost my voice over the weekend coming back from a flow trip. So if you hear me coughing as I talk a lot, then I do apologize. But you had bounced around a little bit after college, though, before you ended up where you are now, right? As far as because you're teaching 12 and 13-year-olds, but were you always doing that?
No, so right after college, I was in Des Moines and I did
Hmm.
some subbing work actually in the like, Des Moines area. I think it was like Western Des Moines, if I'm not mistaken. And
Hmm.
then got a call and like, hey, do you want to be a teacher in Phoenix, Arizona? And I'm
Hmm.
like, you know what? That sounds like a lot of fun. I am in.
Okay.
And I've been here for about, it's going my fourth year.
Because for some reason, my head thought that you had spent some time down in Texas. Is that not right?
No, you are correct. I actually did my student teaching in Houston, Texas.
Okay. Because I wanted to make sure I wasn't going crazy when I thought, oh, like, because I remember when we were setting this up and we were trying to figure out a time that works. And I'm in St. Louis, I'm Central Time, same as when I was in Des Moines. And I kept thinking, like, oh, Joey is still in Texas. After he student taught there, he must have gotten a job in Texas.
No,
But
I
in
did
your
my student
case,
teaching there.
yeah, in your case, that is very much not true. Okay, so 4 years over in Phoenix, Arizona, and you like the area. How's that?
Oh, you know, the old saying is you can't shovel sunshine. I don't miss the winters at all. I love it out
Mm,
here. It having sunshine every day, you don't realize how much you need it. And then you have it and you're like, wow, this is amazing. I
yeah.
I can't tell you how much I love the climate. I can't tell you how much the people here are really nice. It's great. I love Phoenix. It's a blast.
Well, good, good. And we just got done talking about, you bounced, you had student teaching in Texas and went to Des Moines for a little bit, got the call to go to Phoenix, Arizona, never looked back. Um, and we also kind of again had this conversation. Okay, well, you need to stand for something at some point. Yes, we want to be tolerant, but we need as people to have an opinion, because that also helps create identity, right? Like, I'm this person, this is how I feel, this is what I do.
Yes.
And we hinted at this conversation a little bit earlier when, this next generation, just Gen Z, they're so tolerant, they're so bright, and older generations better look out, because they're going to change the world. And then I made a I don't know what you want, just a remark saying we have to make sure that they actually do get to grow up
Yeah.
um, as young adults now. And uh, that's going to segue a little bit. I try not to get too political in these podcasts, mainly because that's not really the intention. We want to promote more self-help, mental health awareness, and things of that nature. But actually, school shootings and mental health almost kind of go hand in hand.
I do.
Um, and that's what we're going to talk about now, is kind of some of the recent school shootings that have been going on around the country. And I know that there are people that are going to feel very strongly about this subject on both sides, if there's even just two sides to this. Um, and because one thing I want to do with this podcast, I was telling Joey earlier, is the fact that we share our experiences a lot, me and my friends, as I reconnect with them on all these topics. But what I also want to do is, well, let's take a look at things from the perspective of people in those professions, or this side of things. So whether it's going to be, I have a therapist on the show, or in our case here, I have Joey, who is a teacher,
Yeah.
and we want to talk about, like, okay, what's going on, because I have a lot of friends that are in elementary education, or just education in general. um and obviously I just have a lot of people in general that have strong opinions about, well, everything that comes along with school shootings. Mainly the big one's going to be is gun control, right?
Yeah.
And I will first say this, like, I think anyone can agree, it's just awful, right? Just
Yeah.
horrible when you see that news and you think about these kids, and um whoever or whatever they could have been, that snuffed short, that their life is snuffed short like that. And there's I'm a big, as anyone can tell, big proponent on, like, we need to make mental health almost a priority, of like saying, like, hey, that, like, there are things we can look at, but that's not meaning it's an excuse to do horrific acts
Yeah.
upon other people. um which some people might have that, well, he was the worst thing. And I was having this conversation with a coworker, as coworkers do. The worst thing is when people have differing opinions about the matter, and because of their differing opinions, they do nothing about it. We filibuster in real life, um, and we don't get to the actual matter of hand. So I will just ask some views that are pretty common, I would say, and just get your opinion about them, as I'll share some more snide or jokey remarks about it. Um, but a lot of people say, well, if we arm our teachers, then this can be avoided. Okay. And I will say this before we get down that rabbit hole. I know a lot of people that own guns that have no business owning guns. And I also know a bunch of teachers that are the last people I want to have a firearm in their hands. Okay. And there are a lot of people listening that immediately, the moment they think of someone that is in education and they have a gun, there's someone that pops in your head and you say, oh, maybe not this person. Right. So, how do we decide, okay, who gets a gun? Does
Yeah.
it help? Uh, and I'll just let you go from there.
So these are all
really.
Oh, and hello to Joey's face, by the way, for those watching.
Absolutely, yes.
He's
Hi,
back.
I'm here. I was driving earlier. Didn't want to not pay attention to the road. I love listening to podcasts when I drive, and then being a part of one is kind of cool because you don't get to talk and they actually listen and stuff. It's kind of neat.
Yeah.
These topics are, everyone has some type of inkling and can feel this topic a lot, because there's a lot of things in politics where, not all of us have, like, it hasn't hit us, like if you were to be
Mhm.
like, oh, we're going to raise the tariff to Cambodia on shipping ceramics.
Mm.
Not everyone has like an opinion on that. They're like,
Mm.
oh, maybe, maybe someone who's like in the ceramics industry is like, oh yeah, I hate it. Or someone else like, oh, no, I love it. And then like most people are like, I don't really know
They're
either
not
way.
affected.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But most of the people in the United States have been to a school in the United States. And since Columbine, they have done active shooter drills. I know that as a kid, I participated in them in elementary school, middle school, high school. As a teacher, being on the other side of the desk, I have to talk to my class about, hey, if this happens, XYZ is going to go down.
Mhm.
So we all have a stake in this because we all know about this. We all have an opinion on this because we've all collectively, after Columbine, if you were in school during that time or
Yeah.
after it, you know about what this is like. You know how schools being created are more like fortresses now because they want to make sure that Columbine, Parkland, Uvalde, and Sandy Hook, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth, don't happen again. And that's kind of the irony of the whole situation is they are happening more and
Mhm.
more. And as a teacher, I remember getting the news about Uvalde, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. Um, and like I had to like stop and like sit down because like I cried a little bit.
Mhm.
It's your heart just breaks for these kids. They're in elementary school. They have their whole life ahead of them, you know?
Yeah.
And then not just that, but like I could picture myself in my classroom and thinking, "Oh my god, like what would I do if there was a shooter in there and like I died?" And like as I'm like losing my like life, I'm watching a shooter just mow through these kids. So
Mhm.
your heart breaks for the teacher in the room because they're doing everything in their power to save their kids. And that teacher was a mom too. So like moms are strong, man. And if, I know for a fact she was doing everything in her power to stop it.
Yeah.
And your heart breaks for the kids and the whole community. And to get to your questions of, okay, should we arm the teachers? What should we do? Like, what's our next steps on gun control? Because gun control is the answer. And as much as
Mhm.
people want to filibuster it and say, well, mental health is bad, but it's like, yeah, mental health is a huge aspect. And that's where gun control can help. You mentioned earlier, a lot of people who have guns who are like, they should not have guns. In my opinion, and this is just me, this is food for thought. How come I can't rent a car until age 25? Why is that? Because
Mhm.
insurance companies know that from the age of 16 till 24, you are more likely a detriment to society behind the wheel. And then as soon as 25 hits, you're more likely to not get into as many accidents. You know?
Mm.
So they're like, let's raise the age of 25 because you are statistically more likely and more at risk, especially men. If you're a male driver, you're more at risk of getting into a car crash from the ages of like 16 to 24 than you are 25 and after.
Which is why we pay more for insurance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
In my opinion, to buy a gun, you need to be 25 years old, whether it's a handgun, an assault rifle, whatever it is. And that's just buying a gun in general. Do I think that people should be able to buy an assault rifle? I really don't.
Mm.
And people go, well, what about my Second Amendment? What about, the tyranny of the government? Dude, the government's got a Predator drone, bro. You ain't going to do anything against a Predator drone. They're going to hit you while you're sleeping, man. Like, I'm sorry. There are things in the United States government that can wipe you off this earth, and they don't even have to be in the room with you. So everyone's like preaching about like, well, they can't take my guns because, I need to fight the government if they try and attack me. They have an M1 Abrams tank, bro.
Mm.
You think you're going to stop an M1 Abrams tank with your AR-15 pea shooter? No, sirree. You're screwed, sorry. So, in
You
my
bring up,
opinion,
let me
yeah,
say,
right? Like,
there's a stand-up comedian that talks about, it's like, for you people that think that, the government coming to take your guns, and you say, well, you need your guns to defend against the government, you don't know how tanks work. Like,
yeah.
and
You don't think they're going to hit you with their space laser, bro? Like, come on. Like, you're like, I'm sorry, man. Like, you're so far screwed. It's not going to happen.
They made tanks for people with assault rifles.
Yep.
Like, we build better machines to pretty much stop you guys from ever doing whatever you want. And
yes. So the argument of to fight the government in an arms insurrection, I'm sorry, but like you're so gone, Now, granted, all of that, I actually had a conversation with my grandfather. He fought in Vietnam, and he brought up the question of, should we arm teachers? And I go, Papa, that's a great question. I'm like, if you go into a neighborhood and you know that there are a lot of shootings, and they're like, hey, you need to wear bulletproof armor while going to this neighborhood. So you put on your bulletproof armor and you go to that neighborhood. That doesn't fix the problem going on in that neighborhood. That doesn't fix what's going on. You're merely putting on a Band-Aid on a huge open wound and going, it's fixed. I feel better. Let's arm the teachers. No, that's not going at what's happening. We need universal background checks. We need the age to buy a weapon to go up, because many of these people, when they get 18, they go to the store, they buy them, and then in short future after, they use them. I don't know about you, but like my 18-year-old self versus my 25-year-old self, 7 more years of maturity. Oh my goodness. My 18-year-old self was a clown compared to me now. Like I'm 26 now. I'm like, that was a child.
And you're still a clown, but just less of one.
Absolutely. I still got the nose, So, I mean, I think the age should be raised. I understand where people are like, well, the Second Amendment, yeah, it says well-regulated militia. It doesn't say, oh, you could buy an RPG at a corner drugstore because Second Amendment. No, it says well-regulated militia. And how are we being a well-regulated militia if we have kids dying in schools?
I have two points to make, because when you say well-regulated militia, because essentially this is what happens with the idea of arming a teacher. And you can think about it too, the fact that we arm policemen and women. The training that goes involved when you're given a license to kill, right? Which is when you say armed teacher, that's what you're going to do. You're signing these teachers up who went to elementary education and college, or post-secondary, whatever it might be, to say, hey, you now have the right to kill a person in your classroom. Okay, well, let's say we do that for people. Well, then we have to talk about feasibility. What's realistic? Are we going to train these teachers the same way that we teach policemen, policewomen, anyone of any force, how to manage a firearm, and then be ready in those situations of school shootings to then make the right choice? And then can they pull the trigger, right? You're asking a teacher to pull the trigger on people, which again, probably in the situation, let's say they don't freeze up and they actually do it, they will actually have to live with that for the rest of life too.
And the kids in the classroom too.
They'll have to see that. So again, Band-Aid, not really fixing the issue. And then also let's talk about, or just hint at, I don't even know if we can talk about the intricacies of it, but even law enforcement gets so much flack for killing people in certain situations when society would say, oh, they had another option. They didn't have to kill this guy, right? And well, this person wasn't properly trained, or this person didn't have all the issues. George Floyd, good example of like abuse of power, and how are we training our police force? And I think even George Floyd was how many years ago now? So 2018, 2019, 2018?
It was 2019. I think it was 3 years ago. 2020. Yeah, 3 years.
And I don't know and this is the sad thing, I don't know how much has changed as far as training and what's expected of policemen as they enter the force. I would hope or assume that maybe we moved the needle a little bit, but if we didn't move the needle at all, then I also wouldn't be surprised, because that's how we operate as a society, which is wait until it's no longer in the media and everyone becomes numb to it, and then we'll go about our day.
Yep. Everything's copacetic, man, if you forget.
So, we have to, for the people listening, we have to ask ourselves, okay, well, if we want armed teachers, are they going to get the same training as our police force when they're given a license to kill? And then is that training that's for our police force adequate enough as well? And I would say waving a gun, or waving, I shouldn't say it that way. Having a gun around in front of kids and just having that lethal option around children would require even more scrutiny than a policeman or woman.
And
policewoman.
let me add on to that, because you're hinting at things that are, if we do this route, there's a lot of questions. Number one, funding. Teachers are notoriously underfunding. Am I going to have to purchase my own handgun? Am I going to have to purchase my own weapon, like bullets and stuff for it? Is it going to be provided by me? Is the state going to provide it? Who's going to provide it? And let's take it even a step further. Could you imagine the insurance costs if every teacher in the classroom had a gun? The collateral itself, the amount of money it would have for a premium for every teacher in the American school system to have a gun would be, for lack of a better term, asinine. It would be
egregious.
Oh my goodness. Like it would bankrupt. It would be insane. And there's other questions too.
You go, continue. Yeah.
And they talk about how we need to harden schools and harden them and make them, like, oh, one exit, one entrance, one way to get in. You ever did a fire drill?
I was just gonna bring up a fire drill.
I'm sorry, but dude, come on, fire drills. And if there's a fire, oh man, the one exit and one entrance is blocked. I'm sorry, but you ever heard the triangle t-shirt fire, the waste fire that happened in the early 1900s in New York, where they had one entrance and one exit, and all those people died in that building? We're talking about things that just, what blows me away too? How is it that society looks at me as an 18-year-old and goes, you're not mature enough and old enough to have a beer, but at the same time, hey kid, you can buy this AR-15 rifle and a couple hundred rounds because you are mature enough for this.
And this is the segue where we stop preaching gun control, and now Joey just advocates for lowering the alcohol age.
No, I like the alcohol age exactly where it is. I think that if we're going to look at things in an arbitrary number, why don't we put them all the same? Why can't we drink at age 25? Why can't we own a gun at age 25 and rent a car at 25? If we want to talk about arbitrary numbers, it's just, how can we look at, you can serve in a war, but you can't buy a Heineken or a Bud Light at a bar at age 18.
Yeah.
How's it?
Well, what's interesting is I think back in the day, at least where divey bars were much more lax on it. And then, but back then everyone was in the military. Everyone was in a war or somehow affected by it. But then nowadays it's very much not the case. And I hope we don't get on too much of a tangent with this, but then also, of course, World War III is going on in our backyard now here pretty soon. With everything that's been going on in Ukraine with Russia and all that stuff. And, it's kind of Cold War 2.0 going on right now with certain conversations. And that's another thing I think about when we talk about, okay, we need to make sure that these kids get to grow up. We got to do that on our home front, but then also, it's our job as young adults. And then, that's the crazy thing is some millennials are in their 40s now, right? Yep. No longer even young adults. You're a full-fledged operating member of society, and you have a choice. And I think I sometimes, as a young professional, kind of get stuck in the idea of, okay, even on situations like gun control, and then injecting that into the school system and what that all looks like, and what are the logistics of it all. Is at the end of the day, we're talking about government regulation, and I think there's some people of an opinion that things are things only get worse when the government touches it. um, and so I don't know. It comes down to a little bit of like us as like I said, working adults, making sure we're electing people that are in our best interests, which hopefully our best interests are the future's best interests. Um, and I start mentioning that as I think about some of the stuff that I've seen on social media from friends, both our age, you and me, but then older millennials, aunts and uncles, grandparents. One, seeing the differences of opinions too, which is crazy. Um, but just kind of wondering if, and not to be like a defeatist mentality, but as we get more and more divided on topics that are much more and more important as time goes on, we get more and more of nothing happening, no change.
Yeah.
And so when I say defeatist mentality, sometimes it's discouraging as a young adult and myself, and people listening. Like I have these thoughts all the time. It's like, can I do anything? Right? Like,
And that's definitely the past, I'd say most of our life, man. With the American political system, there is this idea that, can I really make a change? Like, am I really helping? You know?
mm-hmm.
And I will say this: big things happen by small steps. So having conversations like this, talking to people who have different opinions than you, and like just sharing things, I think that's important. And I'm a hopeless optimist. I do think that things will get better. I really do. But on the flip side, there was a really good quote that someone had. So back then, there was this thing called the Holy Roman Empire.
I think I've heard of them a time or two.
Mm-hmm. And the famous saying was, it was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. And I have to wonder in the future, if they look back at the United States of America and they'll say, it wasn't united, it wasn't states, and it wasn't America. I wonder if that's what they'll say about us. But I'm an optimist, and I think we can do things better. I really do.
Now that's perfect as to what. So when you say we can do things better, talk to me a little bit. We're going to segue away from the depressing subject of kids getting shot needlessly.
Yeah.
By the way, I do want to say needlessly.
Yeah.
And how you talk about Columbine and Sandy Hook, and like how we should have learned our lesson from long ago, but we don't. And then people make justifications that only serve to their own means. Anyway, but as far as getting better as people, but also more in education, talk to me a little bit about public education now that you're in it. What are some things that we do well nowadays teaching kids growing up?
Some of the things we do well with teaching kids is we do have those conversations that when we were kids, we couldn't have. So, for instance, in my classroom, we talk about what's happening in Russia. We talk about what's happening in Ukraine. We talk about those real world things that are happening, those contemporary history moments.
Can 12 and 13-year-olds fathom it? Are they at an age where they can grasp what's going on?
Absolutely. They ask really, really, really good questions. They'll ask questions like, okay, so for Mr. T, you're saying that they are culturally very similar. Granted, they are two countries, but like, they do share some similar cultural things. I'm like, absolutely, they do. And like, why would they want to do that to people who share similar cultural values? I'm like, that's a great question. I'm like, how many of you have ever heard of like gang violence? Like, oh yeah, for sure. I'm like, a lot of times gangs are made up of the same people in the same neighborhood. They just have different gang colors. I'm like, how can they do it? And they go, oh, wow. I'm like, sadly, that's how it goes. Sometimes people look at a very minute difference and they go, that's the thing. That's the difference between you and me. When in reality, we have so much more similar than we do different. And we talk about those things. They ask, how did this start? Where did this begin? And thank goodness we were actually talking about the end of World War II as this was happening. Granted, would never want this to happen, but we were talking about the end of World War II and the Iron Curtain. And I'm like, this directly leads into Ukraine and Russia right now.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, really? Why? I'm like, so I talked to them about how here's a map of everything. Here's how this is broken down. And talking about those political issues with them and like putting on the news. And there's BBC is what I show my kids in class. I think that BBC is one of the best news outlets because it's very middle of the road and it's British people talking about the world and what's going on.
And who doesn't like to listen to British people talk?
Absolutely. And they have a 1 minute news where they'll talk about 3 headlines happening in the world. And we'll take 10, sometimes maybe 15, 20 minutes, we'll talk about it. And they just are sponges, man. They want to know what's happening. They're so just politically charged and full of just vigor. Like they just want to know.
So for those of us that may have forgotten American history, can you explain the Iron Curtain again and how similar it is to what's going on now?
Yes. So after World War II,
or for those that didn't pay attention in American history,
absolutely
calling you out.
It's all good. During World War II, at the end of it, you have 2 major world superpowers that were left standing because of the fact that the whole world was basically engulfed in fire. You had the United States of America and you had USSR. Now, the USSR suffered more casualties during World War II than any other country on the planet. They had estimates can range from 50 to over 60 million casualties. That is astounding. To put that in perspective, that is right now the United States population is 330 million with some change. So if we were to have like 60 million casualties, you are talking about almost a fifth of Americans who are a casualty of World War II. And that's just with today's numbers. Like, that's a crazy amount. So the Iron Curtain is this idea where the USSR comes in, they go, we're going to adamantly make sure that this never happens again. So they shut out the world from their country because they don't want anyone else to do what they did to them during World War II. So the Iron Curtain is this, it's this fictional, there's no like actual Iron Curtain. And everyone's like, oh, damn, that would have been so cool. It's a combination of forts, walls, and borders that separate the USSR from the rest of the world. And this Iron Curtain was meant to be a defensive maneuver to make sure that they weren't attacked. And the thing that people will look at the United States and go, well, all those commies just want to, keep all themselves. And they don't want to, venture out into the world and see like how good it is. It's like, maybe that's the case, but they just are reeling from losing like millions of people more than anyone else. And once you begin to have some empathy and sympathy for other people and put yourself in their shoes, you might do the same. And the Iron Curtain is one of those things where, granted, there were a lot of problems that happened inside the Iron Curtain, but it was a defensive measure to make sure that they protected the people inside their conglomerate of states. That's the way I look at it, at least.
So, so one thing we're doing well, we're actually having these detailed conversations. I think it's refreshing to hear that at 12 and 13, not only are we talking about it, but then these children are curious about it, right? Curiosity is important. And that's something, as we get into adults, I think we lose curiosity, which is sad because I think if you, for people that get listening and watching, get stuck in a rut, tired of the day to day, I think that comes from a little bit of a lack of curiosity. Like it's, in my case, it's almost the opposite where I want to learn so much about everything. And this is more in the past, maybe 2-3 years ago, I would start a lot of projects, like in everything, and then get nothing done. Like start writing a book, start developing an app, start coding, whatever it might be. And I just lost your camera, Joey. If
Oh
you're
shoot,
still there.
sorry. I actually
And
hit a button. I'm like, oh no.
and you know, so again, not that I'm trying to preach here, but for people that little segue, try to be curious about something, because curiosity benefits us in so many ways, mainly because curiosity leads to education, um, at its root, because the only thing that comes out of curiosity is you learning. So um, that's going to be my little tip of the day right there. Stay curious, my friends. But
Could
again,
not more. Absolutely. I as a teacher, that makes me so happy. It does.
now transitioning back to curious 12 and 13-year-olds, that's a great thing to hear that they in fact are taking, like, their sponges, they're going to soak this up. And what is it though that we still do wrong in education?
It's a good question.
If that can be, even, if there's a laundry list, maybe give me the top two. But I mean, I want, before you answer that, I'll just kind of say my piece, and then if need be, we'll go on a small break before I give you a long answer, or you give me a long answer. But I think anyone that's grown up in the school system has always had an issue with, standardized testing and things of that nature, treating every person the same, that we all learn the same way, that we all think the same way. And maybe that's the death of curiosity, is when one kid solves a question in this way of thinking, then gets told that it's wrong, and the other kid who did it the way that he was told to gets it right, then everyone gets put in a box. um I think that's why I enjoy college, although there's a lot of issues with college as well. But mainly the idea of crippling debt and letting an 18-year-old uh, sign a sheet of paper for 40 grand in debt when they don't even know what they want to do with their lives. I digress. I think the great thing about college is it's an opportunity for that box, even if it stays a box, but maybe the box gets a little bit bigger. But and who knows? Some people completely rip outside of the box and become completely different people, which is amazing. And I've seen that firsthand, and I'm actually a pretty good example of that, I would think. Um, but let me, yeah. So um, that's what I think we could work better on, is how do we prioritize learning in a way that emphasizes on the individual and not on the group. Okay, so we're back again. That was my quick take on something that we can do better. I'm sure there's a whole lot of people listening or watching that has their own opinion of what we could do better in school. But again, Joey Tompoulos, Mr. T, as the students would call you, what's something that really rings true for you?
I would definitely agree with what you say about fostering that curiosity and building upon it. Um, I think that oftentimes the people who are in charge of doing like curriculum at the state level and saying like you have to do this, many of the times they're not actually teachers. And it's like, imagine a person not in your field telling you what to do. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. So I think having more teachers in charge of things in their own field would be a nice start, because you would have more opportunities for curiosity. The second thing I would definitely say would be really good to have would be probably more accountability. I know that oftentimes students in Arizona, if they fail a grade and they don't pass any classes, they just move on to the next grade. And it's like, there's no accountability. There's no like teaching about like respect. There's no teaching about responsibility. And then furthermore, too, I think focusing on that mental health aspect, we're in the right direction. We're doing better with it. But having like more like mental health like classes, as well as like time management classes, like understanding like, hey, if this class starts at like 9 o'clock, you shouldn't be here at 8:59. You should be here like maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes beforehand, and having more like real world things. Now, I will say this, you need to have people who are enthusiastic about the job as well. And one of the hard parts though with education is because we're at such a shortage of like teachers in every single grade, every single level, it's hard to find the best when you have to pull from everyone, you know? Like you can't always have the best teachers when you're at a shortage because you need people in the classroom.
Yeah.
And a way to fix that would be to raise teacher salaries.
Hmm.
The saying like, oh, you can just throw money at all the problems. Like there are a lot of things that you can't throw money at that would make it better. More funding for schools, more funding for teacher pay to make sure that it is a competitive field where people want to get in there and go, oh wow, like that'd be so much fun. And I don't have to work like 2 or 3 jobs on top of my teaching just to pay rent, or pay my mortgage. So I think that if you threw more money at it, had more funding, and you made classes having better curriculum and instruction that are actually put forth by teachers, you would help foster more education, more curiosity, and you'd be able to just have a more enthusiastic environment for your students. That's what I would do.
Do you feel sometimes that teachers can also put students in a box though with how they teach?
Sometimes, yeah. And I will say that there are some teachers out there, and just like every profession that has good and bad people in it, there are bad teachers out there. We've all had one, maybe a handful. And I will say that the hard part with education, the longer I'm in it, the easier it is to be jaded by things. Like we are the most politicized job profession in the entire United States of America. And I'll die on that hill. We are brought up in every single presidential election. We are brought up in most midterm elections. We are brought up every single time there's a president. I mean, heck, right now we're being brought up in the news about like, should we be arming teachers? Like, or critical race theory, or I don't want my kids learning XYZ. I don't want them to have this in my classroom, blah, blah. Like, we're the most scrutinized and politicized profession in the entire United States. And if you have a microscope on you all the time and constantly being thrown at it, it's like I have so many hats on a day-to-day basis that I know a lot of those teachers that are bad, they didn't start off that way. The weight of the profession and the weight of the responsibilities just becomes unbearable, to be honest.
For the sake of time and respecting the fact that you came on the show here today, there's so many other things I want to talk about, even just something as simple as, people's opinions about, since everything's been going on the way it has been, homeschool versus public school, private school, things like that.
I'd love to come back on again, man. This is fun.
We don't have the time today, but I want to have returning guests that we didn't have enough time to go over the stuff we wanted to talk about. But if you were to leave the people listening and watching today with kind of a word of wisdom, or something you live by, or something to take away, what do you think that would be?
You can't speak every language, but there is one language that every single person on the planet understands, and that is enthusiasm. If you are enthusiastic about what you do, and you are happy with what you do, and you show a life and a good energy, that breeds and that creates more good energy and more good vibes. So your mindset and how you go about the world actually does help out quite a bit. So I would say to people listening, go into the world, bring a good mindset, bring good vibes, good energy, bring that enthusiasm, and you will create a better space for yourself and others.
Perfect. Well, that's all the time we have here today. For those listening, again, if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel or share it with people that you know. I think this is going to be a topic that a lot of people are going to resonate with on both ends of things. And again, hopefully people learn a little bit more about where I stand with things as well. But also, I think we did a good job of diving into the why behind how we think of things, and as well as um, uh, working around the fact that we understand everyone's opinion. And okay, well, if we go this way, what happens? Because a lot of people don't think about the what happens. But again, please share. If you or anyone uh, has struggled with stuff like this, or just wants to learn them, educate themselves more, become more curious, or if you feel like you need a friend, you can come meet mine, and we'll see you all next Saturday. Thanks, Joey.
Thank you so much.